Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the Certificate in Clinical Research. I'm so happy to have you here today. Just a few items before we get started. You can submit your questions at any time during the webinar through the questions tab. And we have our continuing studies advisor, Elspeth, and our program coordinator, Donna, who will be monitoring the chat, and they'll be happy to answer your questions. So please don't hesitate to take advantage of that. Also, we have an industry special guest here today. So after I complete my kind of information session about the high points of the program, please do stick around to hear from Miran Kank, one of our instructors and curriculum developers. And also just a heads up that your microphones have been muted to prevent background noise. Also noting that this webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you after today's session. So again, welcome to today's webinar for the Certificate in Clinical Research. We're thrilled to have you here today. Before I get started, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So my name is Nicole Pereira. I am the Program Manager of the Certificate in Clinical Research within the Continuing Professional Education Division of the School of Continuing Studies at York University. And I'm so pleased to be joined by my colleague, Miran Kank, today, who is a Scientific Associate with the Princess Margaret Cancer Center and the University Health Network. So just going through our agenda, we're going to start with providing you with an overview of the School of Continuing Studies at York University. I'm going to provide you again with an overview of what clinical research is all about. We're going to go through an overview of the program itself, high points around registration and enrollment, some student resources and tips for your success as a student at York U. Then I'm going to turn it over to our industry guest speaker, Miran, who's going to be speaking about challenges and opportunities in post-COVID clinical research. So York University School of Continuing Studies, if you're not familiar, is the fastest growing continuing education unit in the country. The objective of the foundation of the school, which was first launched in 2015, was to offer industry-targeted and specialized programming in fields that are growing, in demand, emerging, and highly stable, where there's excellent job opportunities. And then to put together cutting-edge programs in hand with senior industry leaders, with employers, to really deliver on providing the highest quality educational experience for our learners. And in doing that, we rely on what we call cohort-based learning. And that means that you're going to be working with the same set of peers from the beginning of the program until the end. And that really allows us to develop a cohesive program where you're all learning on the same timeline, you're benefiting from the community that's being formed. It encourages a lot of peer-to-peer collaboration and the establishment of really strong professional networks that you can leverage for many years. So this is a quote from our school founder and assistant vice president, Tracy Taylor O'Reilly. And like I've already mentioned, the objective and the driving mission of our school is to position our graduates not just to get hired, but to also be able to demonstrate that they have what it takes to get promoted and to advance in whatever field they're trained in. So what is clinical research exactly? Clinical research is an area of healthcare science that focuses on the integrity of medical trials. A clinical research professional is involved in the organization and management of studies conducted across multiple phases to assess the safety and effectiveness of medications, vaccines, devices, diagnostic products, and treatment plans. A clinical research professional is adept at interpreting and navigating the regulatory environment and applying legislative standards to the successful execution of clinical trials. So this program has been designed specifically for a variety of professionals at different stages of their career. First being new graduates and early career professionals with a related degree. And these are people who are looking to specialize their skills and experience in this growing industry of clinical research specifically. Secondly, and very importantly, we've designed this program keeping internationally educated medical doctors and other internationally educated health practitioners in mind. And this is people who have come to Canada and who want to meaningfully apply their already existing skills and experience into a growing and challenging field. We've also designed this program for trained nurses. This could be registered nurses and registered practical nurses who are looking for opportunities for change, for advancement, and professional growth. Also laboratory and medical technicians and technologists who are looking to move into a related career. And lastly, professionals who may already be working in clinical research, but who may not have the formal education needed to be promoted and to advance in that field. So let's go through a program overview of what this program has to offer. And before I get into that, I would like to mention that the York University School of Continuing Studies is very different from the very conceptualization stages of program design. So what you can find with this program is that it's being led by a world-class program advisory board of leading industry experts who represent all facets of the sector, and I'll provide more information about that in a coming slide. But this is really our steering committee who guides our decisions, guides our curriculum, and what we bring to that learning experience for our students to ensure that it is completely aligned with employer and industry needs and expectations. Secondly, this is the only clinical research certificate offered at the university level in the GTA, and it is also the only blended certificate available. What I mean when I say blended is that this program offers a combination of online learning and live learning in a virtual environment. So it really offers the best of both worlds in terms of maximum flexibility and also very high levels of engagement. We also have a very hands-on and practical focus to this program. We've really put experiential learning and practical assignments to the forefront to ensure that our graduates are prepared for a variety of different job roles in the field, and that the assignments that you're completing mirror exactly what you would be expected to do by an employer on the job. So we have I guess, lesser theoretical and academic focus and a much more hands-on and practical focus, so that upon graduation, you can really demonstrate to employers what your skills and competencies are that you can bring to that employer to start adding immediate value. This program is also in an accelerated part-time format, which gives you flexibility if you already are working and are balancing professional and personal, possibly childcare responsibilities. So you can take this program in the part-time format, but it is still accelerated. So it will only take 9.5 months to complete and to receive your certificate. We've already talked about the cohort model and how this model is really optimized for professional networking, and also really optimized to achieve the highest level of learning outcomes, as you and your peers will be progressing together along the same learning journey. We have a fully modernized curriculum. This program was designed and delivered by senior practitioners, and it was designed for the next generation of clinical research. So we began conceptualizing and developing this program after COVID had already happened. And so that is really at the heart of the curriculum that you will be receiving, making sure that we've incorporated all of the latest tools and technologies and all of the changes to this industry that have come about as a result of the pandemic. And then lastly, we offer a capstone course, which is the last course in the certificate. And this course combines all of the previous learnings in your prior courses into an applied clinical research management project, where you with your teams really have to think on your feet and respond to challenging situations in the execution of a mock clinical trial, which really mirrors real life experience. So I want to take a moment to focus on our advisory board members. We have 9 advisory board members who are coming from a variety of different organizations that are really top of the field. So we have Robert Campos from the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, Julie Surtees from Apotex, Lisa Goss from the Hospital for Sick Children, Brenda Muscat from Veristat, Mariana DeLaudo from GlaxoSmithKline, Tamor Bibi from Hoffman LaRoche, Nicole Campbell from EMD Serono, Natal Desai from Novum Pharmaceutical Research Services, and Nadia Romano from Icon PLC. So as you can see, we have very good representation across hospitals, research institutes, clinical research organizations, pharmaceutical companies, and so on. Going on now into our instructors and curriculum developers. Same rules apply here. We have Amin Jagani from Parexel Biotech, Miran Kenk from University Health Network, Princess Margaret Cancer Center, Tracy Heaney from Janssen Inc., which is the pharmaceutical division of Johnson & Johnson. Again, Tamor Bibi from Hoffman LaRoche, Celine Sabu, also from Hoffman LaRoche, and Ronak Danak from AstraZeneca. I want to take a moment to go through our courses that make up the certificate. So you'll begin with Principles of Clinical Trials, Research and Drug Development, which is 6 weeks in length. Moving on to Regulatory and Ethical Issues in Clinical Trials, again 6 weeks. Clinical Trial Design and Planning, 6 weeks. Clinical Research Operations is 8 weeks long. Clinical trial monitoring is 6 weeks, and then the final clinical research capstone is 5 weeks. So the total duration to complete the certificate is 9.5 months, as I've mentioned. As you will note, the courses are not all the same length. And the reason for this is that when we're designing programs in the School of Continuing Studies, we put first and foremost the questions we ask ourselves is, what exactly do our students and graduates need to know to be successful in the industry? And then we go about designing our courses to mirror that exactly. And that often means that the courses will not all be exactly the same length, because we're not trying to fit them into some sort of predetermined mold and make courses that, really could be shorter, longer, or make courses that need to be longer, shorter, and try to crunch that learning into a shorter time span. So we really have that flexibility in giving you exactly what you need, how and when you need it. Something else that we've really taken into serious consideration in designing this program is looking at the importance of cross-functional skills. Cross-functional skills are the professional skills that will be the foundation of your career success and advancement. So they're different than the core technical or hard skills that are necessary to do the job, and really speak to the skills that will make you excellent at your job. So through our research and stakeholder involvement, we've identified that these are the top cross-functional skills that are required to be successful in the field of clinical research. And so these have been incorporated throughout all aspects of the curriculum. So you'll be focusing not just on your hard skills, but also on these professional and very universal skills that will serve you in any area of this business. In terms of the delivery format, as I've mentioned, we offer a very unique combination of asynchronous, which is self-directed online learning that you can complete on your own timeline and at your own pace, as well as live online instruction. So this means that you'll have many opportunities to engage with your instructors and your peers in real time. And like I've already said, this gives you really the best of both worlds, where you have flexibility in when you complete your work and how you balance your personal and professional responsibilities. But you also have lots of opportunities to connect with your peers and your instructors. Like I've mentioned, each course is 5 to 8 weeks length. And this includes online learning plus 2 mandatory weekend blocks of live online learning, which will be conducted via Zoom. And this will be on 2 Saturdays and Sundays per course between 9 in the morning and 12 in the afternoon, so for 3-hour blocks. Additional optional live Zoom sessions will be scheduled throughout the program, and this is for enhanced interaction and support for you. Again, these are optional, so you can attend them if you want to. If you're not able to attend, they will be recorded and posted within your course so that you can access them at any time and still take advantage of those learnings. So in addition to the live components, please expect to dedicate approximately 8 to 12 hours of effort each week for your classwork, and that may include readings, discussion boards, assignments, and so on. So let's take a moment now to go through registration and enrollment. This is an open enrollment program, which means that you are not required to apply and to submit any documentation for our approval. Now, you do have to self-select. So that means you have to identify that this is the right program for you. And what you need to consider is, do you have an existing university degree in health sciences or related? So this may include, but is not necessarily limited to, life sciences, biology, medicine, nursing, nutrition, physiology, anatomy, pharmacy, pharmacology, kinesiology, biochemistry, epidemiology, psychology, or health informatics. I apologize, that's a long list. Alternatively, you can bring a college diploma in health sciences or related, but if you're coming with a college diploma, we ask that you also bring prior experience in the healthcare or clinical research sector. In addition to that, we ask that you have English language proficiency at the minimum levels that have been identified below in the chart. And these are all necessary components of your success. In terms of course enrollment, there's nothing you need to do here. We will enroll you on all of your courses, so no action is needed on your part. Full payment is due before the start of the program, and if you have any questions about that, you can email the registration team at regscs@yorku.ca. And enrollment will close the last business day before the start of the program unless it sells out earlier, so it's best not to wait to register. Looking now at student resources and tips for your success, because there are live online components of this program where you'll be engaging in real time with your instructors and classmates, you will need to have basic technology set up to participate meaningfully. And this means that you'll need a device with a camera and microphone. You'll need high-speed internet access and access to a quiet space. If you have more questions about what exactly is needed, you can access the link below for more details. Okay, so in terms of value-added services that you will have access to as a York University School of Continuing Studies student, you will have access to an online suite of AI-driven personalized career tools, and you can access these anytime, anywhere. The culmination of all of these tools is referred to as Career Nexus, and this includes LinkedIn Learning, so you'll have an account for LinkedIn Learning, 10,000 Coffees, which is an online networking platform where you'll be matched with individuals who are in the field that you aspire to enter. We also have Quincy, AI Resume and Interview Optimizer. We also offer live workshops and career talk coaching sessions through our partner, The Talent Company. So these resources are all available to you, and you can learn more at continue.yorku.ca/career nexus. So that brings me to the end of my portion of today's webinar. So if you have any other questions or want to connect with us to learn more about the program, you can reach us at continue@yorku.ca. Again, you can continue to submit your questions through the chat. And with that said, I'm now going to turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Miran Kank, for the second half of today's webinar. So looking now at what we're going to be doing with the industry guest speaker here. Welcoming Miran. Miran has over 12 years of experience in clinical research, conducting academic and industry-sponsored clinical trials in oncology and neuropsychopharmacology. As a scientific associate with the Surgical Oncology Department of the Princess Margaret Cancer Centre, the largest oncology hospital in Canada, and a global leader in cancer research, Miran oversees the conduct of a number of phase 2 and 3 clinical trials, evaluating novel disease biomarkers and treatments. He's responsible for multi-site phase 3 studies and adaptive clinical trials delivered across Canada and the United States. Miran obtained a PhD in cellular and molecular medicine pharmacology from the University of Ottawa, followed by a postdoctoral fellowship at CAMH in Toronto. And Miran is a curriculum developer and instructor with the School of Continuing Studies Clinical Research Certificate. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Miran. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Nicole. Thanks a lot for that introduction. And it's definitely my pleasure and an honor to present this topic that has been giving me quite a lot of food for thought over the past months and years. And I think it's an interesting topic, and it provides a very good introduction to the program as well, a bit of an overview into it. So I'll start with the I'll begin by putting the COVID situation into the context of clinical research and research in general. So medicine is as old as humanity itself, and clinical research has been advancing in parallel for decades and centuries with the implementation of clinical trials and research that includes multiple arms, control arms, and placebos. But the research framework that we operate in right now has been developed in the later half of the 20th century with the publication of the Nuremberg Code, the Belmont Report, and the Declaration of Helsinki. These three events or three publications have set the groundwork for the good clinical practices, which are the principles that guide the conduct of clinical research today. These have moved research from a pursuit of just science itself into a field where clinical research has to be ethical, morally appropriate, and has to be performed with the ultimate goal of preserving the safety, the well-being, and the rights of the participants. So the good clinical practices, or the GCP, have set out principles that are then translated into the regulations enforced by different national bodies, including Health Canada here in Canada, and the Food and Drug Administration in the US, or the EMA in the European Union. These regulations, in turn, are what dictates the institutional policies and standard operating procedures that determine how the hospitals and the research centers actually perform research involving human participants. So that framework or that ecosystem basically consists of an interaction with the sponsor and investigator with input from the national regulatory health authorities and the research ethics board. The sponsor is responsible for developing the protocol and setting the objectives of the clinical trial, and then executing the trial through the investigators. So they would be tasked with selecting the investigators, providing them with all the required materials and information, such as the protocol and the consent forms and things that they generally need to run the trial. And they would ensure that the investigator runs the trial in full compliance with the GCP principles that I mentioned before. So this also involves the implementation of the adequate monitoring, where the sponsor keeps an eye on the things that are happening at the research sites and ensures that all the appropriate ethical reviews and approvals are in place. Investigator, on their end, protects the right safety and the well-being of the subjects, performs all the patient or participant-facing concepts of the trial, and ensures all the informed consent is obtained, and other operational aspects such as controlling the study drug storage and the record keeping. So this deceptively simple framework actually in practice makes the clinical research one of the most regulated industry in the modern society. And this system has been running quite effectively for the past 4 decades with unprecedented advances in new therapeutics and clinical research. And then, as we've probably all been affected, the COVID, sorry, one second. The onset of the COVID pandemic changed things, obviously. So after the first cases were detected in December of 2019, in March of 2020, World Health Organization declared a global pandemic. And I'm displaying here the fluctuations in the case numbers in Canada, and in parallel, the changes that happened in the society and in the medical system to reflect that. So bans on travel, implementation of the emergency state, changes in the health services, health workforce, public notices about distancing, closures, lockdowns, and all these things. So what I want to emphasize here is the time frame under which how quickly this situation developed and how quickly restrictions happened on things such as the operation of the hospital and the working of the staff, as well as general functioning of the society. My focus obviously will be on how the COVID situation reflected on the clinical research. And being that my research activities are centered on a clinical research center that's a hospital, I will describe the institutional, subject or participant facing, and the sponsor levels in which the COVID has affected us. So on an institutional level, a lot of research staff or people that would normally be conducting clinical visits, monitoring, or dealing with the sponsors have been redeployed. So they were taken off the clinical research tasks and put into things that support the emergency functioning of the hospital. Obviously, this resulted in a number of clinical research projects being placed on hold. From the subject's perspective, the clinical trial visits have been canceled, and definitely the participants are found to deprioritize participation in the clinical research during this time. Obviously, if you're told to stay away from your relatives, you're not going to be too keen to go into a hospital where other sick people might gather just to support someone's clinical research. The lack of in-person visits definitely decreased the sample collection, strongly affecting research that relies on biospecimens. And finally, from a sponsor perspective, the accrual plummeted in the first half of the 2020, and the trial activations obviously were put on hold because of the restrictions that the hospitals implemented. The graph on the right side shows you the number of the trials activation per month, and it shows the dip that happened in the early 2020. One thing to note in this graph is that this disruption is very temporary. So you can see that already by the second half of the 2020, the system recovered itself. And that's interesting because a disruption of this degree has been compensated, or there's a feedback mechanism that allowed the clinical research ecosystem to reestablish itself. So this is what I will focus in the next slide, which is the kind of immediate response of the system, both the medical system and the research system, to the COVID pandemic. So on the level of site investigators, the first thing that changed is that the lack of in-person visit moved everything to phone and video telehealth kind of settings. So basically any visits that would normally require a clinician to see a patient have been moved into an online setup, which definitely posed some challenges for the participants and as well as for the clinical research staff. But you can imagine that in a way, this allowed us to operate even when the hospitals were pretty much in lockdown. So things such as the study drug delivery, which formerly used to require the patient to come into the institution and see the pharmacist, could now be done remotely by mail. And study procedures were moved out of the tertiary research centers into local labs, and some visits, such as simple physicals or basic procedures, could be done by local physicians rather than by the physicians in the research centers. Additionally, and I'll focus later on this, that there was a widespread use of online consent, which was one of the basic fundamental principles of the good clinical practice, is the implementation of the informed consent, which requires a long discussion with the clinical staff, a back and forth, and a review of a fairly complicated document reaching up to 30 or 40 pages by the patient. So all of these changes were implemented immediately because these were the things that previously the institutions discussed and they were tempted to put in, and some of them were actually implemented in extreme circumstances and with some support from Health Canada. But with COVID, the circumstances were extreme all across the board, which required everyone to basically adopt these new approaches. From the sponsor side, the selection of sites for the study conduct has definitely been reshuffled such that the sites that are capable of doing remote research visits were prioritized for activation. Additionally, the studies that were deemed critical and necessary were prioritized for activation, which actually accelerated the study startup in some cases. And finally, monitoring has been implemented in a remote setting. I can't overemphasize just what kind of a change this is, because clinical study monitors, which form a large component of the clinical research staff, used to accumulate their air miles at a pretty astronomical rate. But in the new setting, all they really need is a quiet place in their basement, a good solid internet connection, and basically a good coffee maker to keep the monitoring visits going. So these are the immediate changes. And now that the COVID situation has been adapted to, if not completely resolved, we are looking as a field and as a research system into which aspects of this can be actually implemented in the future. So which of these temporary measures can be made permanent for the benefit of the participants and the research field. So one clear opportunity for improvement is to improve the effective use of technologies, both the ones that are currently available and any that will come in the future, to make the research safer and more efficient. So one thing that we've done during the early months of 2020 is to switch our research trials to online data collection using text messages to approach the participants with reminders and login information. So this used to be something that was a very tough sell to the Research Ethics Board and the Health Canada, but now it's becoming more and more acceptable. Additionally, e-consent is now becoming the norm, which means that what used to require kind of compressed and very difficult communications between the participant and the research staff can be now done through email and through allowing the participant to actually truly review the consent forms at their own time and make informed decisions following questions to their family physician, study staff, and all the other interesting parties. Finally, data sharing is a big thing, not so much in Ontario because the Ontario health system already has in place the infrastructure and the permissions to share the data between different institutions and centers, but there is definitely more space for de-siloing or for removing the barriers between the data sharing between centers. And finally, there's a switch between going from physical samples and moving things in CDs for imaging into digital transfer of images for pathology or for radiology. This additional advancement that has been in the works for quite a few decades is now becoming rapidly accelerated through both the improved internet infrastructure and the cloud-based technologies. And now with the COVID, there's more of a motivation and more of a reason to actually pursue it further. So these are the changes that are applicable to the conduct of the studies. But there are also improvements that we've discovered could be quite easily implemented in designing more effective decentralized research. So in order to get more out of the participants that we have, the research can change into more of a personalized space such that the previous design of studies could be improved by adding biomarker and potentially genetic markers to determine which study is appropriate for which participant. In a field of oncology, for example, this greatly improves the patient's outcomes because it ensures that he or she don't lose their time on evaluating different treatments with low probability of success, but rather have treatment that is truly personalized to them. Additionally, the protocols are moving from previous relatively simple monolithic design into settings where a master protocol is also affiliated with different sub-protocols that allows basically more data and more information and more drugs to be tested within one setup. Additionally, the incorporation of biomarkers and surrogate endpoints, which has previously been ongoing but has been debated ad nauseum between the field and the research regulatory agencies, is now becoming kind of a norm in the field. And finally, the biobanking and international collaborations are definitely being implemented across the board to make sure that we are definitely getting more information and more samples and more data on the patient outcomes from the participants that are in the clinical trial. Sorry, 1 second. I think I skipped one. One aspect that definitely was previously presented in the changes in the study design is this whole decentralization of the clinical research. This is something that has been a product of this years and decades of clinical research environment where a few high-end clinical research centers, so tertiary health centers located in the centers of large urban areas, would monopolize all the research by having all of the study procedures performed at these clinical trial sites in these high-end hospitals. So we're talking about the Sick Kids or maybe Juravinsky Center in London, and then leaving the rest of the population that lives in a less in rural areas unserved by the clinical trials. Now, it has been noticed that 70% of the participants usually live about 2 hours or more away from a clinical research center, which definitely impacts the diversity and the geographic as well as the economical factors that dictate who participates in this clinical research, since obviously not everybody can take 5 hours out of their day just to participate in a clinical trial. So this movement from the fully centralized towards a hybrid or fully decentralized system would result in trial procedures moving from the research sites into either patients' homes using technology or to their local physicians. This would greatly change the landscape of clinical research and is likely to happen at least to a certain degree in the coming 5 years, and probably over the coming decades will become the norm. The opportunities for this kind of research are provided by the fact that the tools are maturing, as well as the regulatory acceptance is becoming, we're reaching the point at which Health Canada can actually tolerate the fact that some research procedures will be done by a well-trained family physician rather than only limiting to the clinical trial staff in a large hospital. Finally, the challenges that are still coming up against this decentralization of research is the need to ensure that the data quality is of the highest level, such that all the people who are producing the data or providing the data to the research team have to ensure that their equipment and their techniques are top-notch. The patient buy-in is still challenging because not everybody wants to have the clinical research so approachable within their place of residence or their local physicians. And finally, the site investigator buy-in will remain a problem and will change probably over the decades as more people are trained in this, since convincing clinician scientists at UHN in downtown Toronto to participate in a clinical trial is not nearly as difficult as explaining the benefits of participating in a clinical research trial to a family physician in Sudbury or Kapuskasing. So one question that came out of the COVID is, with these potential changes, some of them implemented just to respond to the crisis, is there a pattern? Is there a set of characteristics or things that the clinical researchers can implement to respond to a challenge such as the COVID-19 pandemic? And as I've discussed previously, large and coordinated clinical trials that can span hospitals and test multiple treatments against one condition are needed. Additionally, well-designed, large-scale clinical trials have to rely on coordinated data collection in order for them to be accurate. We've seen this during the COVID times when a lot of publications that were coming out weekly were of small patient populations and really limited regional centers reporting their local data in sometimes divergent ways, which made them harder to interpret. So one thing that the clinical research has proposed and will definitely implement, such that the next pandemic or a similar global crisis is met, is a system of sharing the data between institutions, research groups, and even between countries, such that the research that's provided is real-time and high quality. This will increase the transparency and allow us the regulatory systems to make rapid real-time decisions based on the situations that are emerging quickly. So what is the clinical research in the future going to look like? Based on the lessons from COVID, we have an opportunity to make research more safe, more accessible, and more equitable. So a regulatory environment that is agile and able to incorporate the emerging trial designs as well as the novel tools and technique into research will allow us to make the trials more efficient, but also to increase the number of people that can access these trials and remove the barriers that they would normally have. decentralized clinical trials, ones that can work with diverse patients populations with, across the different geographical regions within Canada, can reduce also the barriers and improve the diversity of the samples, which is sorely needed. And the fostering of collaborative research across institutions will facilitate data sharing, and this transparency will help us to fight the proliferation of suspicious research and research that's done for commercial or kind of misinformation purposes. This will definitely be an ongoing challenge, as mentioned by this recent editorial in the journal Nature, but it's something that we have to fight by better data, better sharing, and better research. So who will help this research become reality? The people that are joining this program hopefully will have the traits and skills, or will develop them, to conduct this post-COVID clinical research. Definitely require a passion for science and research, a willingness to learn, and a comfort with all the new technologies and techniques that will be coming in. So adaptability and a constant eye towards modern innovations and new discoveries is definitely needed. Finally, because of the decentralized nature of future research, there will be a need for good communication and for definitely an ability to sustain and develop collaborative networks across institutions as well as across countries. This kind of complexity of the clinical research, not that clinical research now wasn't complicated enough, will require an increased ability to manage the multiple tasks simultaneously, and will definitely require critical thinking and problem-solving skills. So I'm hoping that the participants in this webinar and the people that register for the program will find these skills appropriately exercised and developed through the program. Thank you, and I'm glad to take any questions.
Great, Miran, thank you so much for walking us through what the changes have been with the clinical research industry with the onset of COVID-19. So just a reminder to everyone that you can reach us at continue.yorku.ca, but we are available now to continue taking your questions in the chat and any questions that you may have for Miran as well. Elspeth, are there any questions coming through the chat that we'd like to pose?
There are no questions. Oh, there is one question in the Q&A now. Which institutions do we apply to after finishing the course? I'm not quite sure I understand that, but perhaps it will make more sense to you, Nicole. And
yeah, I assume that the individual's asking, you know, where might the job opportunities be and what types of organizations might be looking to hire graduates of this program. But again, please do feel free to correct me in the chat. And Miran, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of opportunities for the next steps following the program. The most obvious ones would be either the pharmaceutical industry, the CROs or the clinical research organizations, or, and this is kind of my pathway in this, the academic institutions that conduct research. So with the fundamentals that will be provided by this program, you could apply for clinical research associates or assistants or other similar positions, either with any of the drug companies within the industry or within places like UHN. And if you just follow Indeed any job postings from UHN, you can see a variety of positions that are constantly opening.
Thank you so much, Miran. Now, we do have another webinar that we recorded with one of our advisory board members, curriculum developers and instructors, Taimur Bibi, back in December, and it talks all about careers in clinical research, and everyone can access that webinar. Raquel, I know you're on the line. Could you explain to attendees how they might be able to access that recording?
Yes, of course. So for the past couple of weeks, we have been promoting our live event, but we also list a number of on-demand webinars, which means they've been pre-recorded and you can log in at any time that is convenient for you. So just visit our website and look for the events and webinars section, and you'll see our on-demand and live events available on the page.
Great. So the next question that's come in is there a need to travel frequently in this position? So I assume that that has changed dramatically, but I'm going to pass that to you, Miran, to discuss in more detail.
That definitely has changed dramatically. So, I mean, a clinical trial monitor used to probably be able to expect to travel for 3 days out of a week, but that has rapidly changed. In the current setting, a lot of the work is performed from the office or from home, and I expect that there's be a further centralization of activities, such that the travel will become less and less. If you're something like a medical sciences liaison, I think the travel is unavoidable, because you'll be going basically from one research institution to the other to spread awareness of whatever product your employer has. And there are still certain positions that are heavily travel involved, but those are usually quite well flagged. I mean, they're indicated for what they are. What I'm increasingly seeing is positions with companies that are um, available for applicants to work either in something like, let's say, New Jersey, Toronto, or Boston, or Europe. So the COVID changes have resulted in a strong decentralization, such that people used to work on one specific project. They were all geographically in the same place. Now it's a little bit different. So if anything, the requirements for the travel are coming down in the field, but certain positions will still retain it.
That's great. Miran, I have a question for you, and I'm just wondering if someone comes into this program as an internationally trained doctor, what might the pathway, the career pathway in clinical research look like for them, and how might that be unique, and what types of positions would be a good fit for them?
That's a very good question. There are a lot of positions that I've seen for foreign trained pharmacists and foreign trained physicians in the pharmacovigilance departments of larger companies. So this is basically, it would mean that you're dealing with the adverse events and the serious adverse events using your medical training, foreign medical training, and you don't really require licensure in Ontario or in Canada to perform those tasks. The one thing that foreign trained physicians usually encounter is that it's difficult to break into the market, because there are concerns about the specific training that they've received, about the language proficiency, and just basically familiarity with the Canadian system. And the program, as at least our sections that we've developed, have it's tailored towards providing that immersion into the system, into the communication pathways that are inherent in the clinical trials. So this is where it fills that gap, where it builds on a proficiency in clinical matters and just provides it exposure to the Canadian clinical trial system, Canadian and global, because a lot of things are equivalent.
Great, thank you so much, Miran. And obviously, we're seeing a lot of nurses leaving the profession right now with burnout and everything that's going on with the pandemic. How do you see clinical research as being an opportunity for nurses, and where might they fit in this sector?
So clinical research, at least on the institutional level, which is probably the one I've exposed to most, it actually is a very, very good place for nurses. It provides them immediate access to a position such as a clinical research coordinator level 3, which is well paid and very responsible. There's an increasing concern about the staff that actually does the patient-facing activities, such that a lot of hospitals require a nurse to be performing these tasks. So it doesn't have to be a nurse, again, that's fully licensed in Ontario, but as long as the training is there, it allows a person to participate in this really a key position within the clinical research. From the industry side of things, I think it's equivalent. Basically, the foreign physician training and the nursing training also provides all the basics for the person to excel in clinical trial. Now, that being said, the training in nursing doesn't always cover all these regulatory aspects and the more bureaucratic and project management things, and that's kind of where the program fills the gap, I believe.
Excellent. And why did you choose a career in clinical research, and what do you most enjoy about being in that profession?
So my graduate school was very much performed with, it basically was properly translational. I went from a radiochemistry lab where it was developing compounds that would later be injected as imaging radio tracers into people, through in vivo and in vitro research into the kind of clinical research, human aspects of it. And what I've seen is that the most direct impact and the most relevant science comes through clinical research. So all the work that people do in an in vitro setting is groundbreaking and very constructive. But at some point, I mean, someone joked that they've cured cardiac disease in rats many, many times, but that doesn't get us really anything. So the whole movement of research into the human setting is what I find truly exciting. This is where the actual publications, and this is where the truly groundbreaking work happens. And this is where you can see a difference pretty much immediately. I mean, in the oncology field especially, there's a hunger for new treatments, and there's enthusiasm from the patient population, obviously, for any new treatments that kind of feeds your research drive. So you're not just at the bench doing pipetting, you're doing something that you can immediately see could potentially benefit a patient population within a year or two.
Excellent. Now, the attendees have heard from me, how we put this program together and the stakeholders that were involved, and also, the lens that we use when designing the curriculum and making it practical. But I'm wondering if you can talk about that experience from your perspective, and from your perspective, what students can expect to experience as a student in this program.
For sure. So I think that the key behind this program is the actual practical application of things. The people that are teaching it are not ivory tower professors, but rather kind of veterans of the trenches of clinical research who have seen it all. And I think that emphasis on translating this information from a successfully run clinical trial into an educational program is the biggest, absolutely the biggest strength. We, as we're teaching this program, in some ways we're looking at as educators, but also as employers. It's basically, what would I like to see with people who are coming into my research group? What knowledge, what traits, and what proficiencies would I like these people to have? So approaching that in a teaching setting is probably the most beneficial. But I think other than that, also one thing that's threaded throughout the program is the fostering of communication and sort of softer skills that people will need. So this is one thing that, again, with the foreign trained physicians might be necessary. It's that exposure to the tools and the techniques that are used in interacting with regulatory agencies, with industry members, and with the clinical trial sites that I hope we can convey to the students.
Excellent. And what attracted you to participate in the development and design and delivery of this program, Miran? Because you're obviously a busy person, you're an important person, you have a lot of things on the go. So what brought you here?
Mostly selfish reason. It's actually exactly what I just said. It's a personal need to have more people of quality entering our research program. So I felt that there's an inadequacy to the training that's currently out there, and there is basically no standards and no clear training pathway that leads to a clinical research degree. So participating in developing this program, I'm hoping will actually result in the increasing and providing specific training for people that will be coming to our group.
Excellent.
It was basically to address a need, so to say.
Thank you so much, Miran. I really, really appreciate that. That brings us to the end of today's webinar and information session. As I've been saying, please don't hesitate if you didn't have all your questions answered today, or if any questions arise for you after today's session ended, to reach out to us at continue@yorku.ca. That will put you in touch with Elspeth, our continuing studies advisor, and she'd be happy to answer your questions and support you in any way that you need. We do hope to see you at York University at the end of this month in the Clinical Research Certificate. And we do wish you all the very best in your ongoing professional careers. So Thank you so much for your attendance and your participation today. Miran, thank you so much for being here. Elspeth, Donna, and Raquel, thank you for monitoring the chat and answering questions. And I hope that everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
Thank you, Miran.